palace corridors had never felt this tense. For decades, Queen Camilla's steps echoed through the marble halls with unchallenged authority. Until now. Overnight, royal security protocols were rewritten, her access cards revoked, her protection detail, the very guards sworn to her safety, reassigned to another royal. And not just any royal, but Princess Catherine, the future queen and heart of the nation. Whispers turned into gasps. Had the power truly shifted inside Buckingham Palace? And if so, who ordered it? And why now? Before we uncover this extraordinary palace move, make sure to tap that subscribe button and ring the bell. You don't want to miss what's coming next in this unfolding royal drama. Drop your thoughts below. Whose side are you on? Catherine's grace or Camilla's crown? Now, let us step behind the palace gates and see what really happened when loyalty was tested at the highest level. It began with a silence that didn't belong inside Buckingham Palace. Usually, even at midnight, the grand corridors carried a soft rhythm, the distant shuffle of guards, the echo of footsteps over marble, and the faint hum of security monitors. But that night, everything went still, like the palace itself was holding its breath. A single line of light leaked out from under the Royal Security Office door. Inside, the commander of the Royal Guard stood over a table scattered with sealed documents and digital tablets. His jaw was tight. His eyes fixed on one name highlighted across the top of an official directive: Camilla, Queen Consort. For the first time in decades, her clearance was being revoked. He hesitated before signing the final line, not because he doubted the order, but because he understood what it meant. Once this went through, Camilla would no longer have unrestricted access to certain wings of the palace. More stunningly, her personal protection unit would be reassigned under a different royal's command. He took a deep breath, pressed his signature into the page, and whispered quietly, "God save the Queen, whichever one that means now." By morning, whispers swept across every corner of the palace. From the head chefs to the chauffeurs, everyone had heard something, though no one dared speak openly. Camilla's schedule had been mysteriously cleared. Her driver was told to stand down. Even her usual escort through the north entrance had been replaced by a new team, one that didn't answer to her anymore. When she arrived at the palace that morning, she noticed it immediately. The doors opened slower. The guards saluted, but their eyes shifted, as if they were following a new protocol. She turned toward one of them, a young officer, nervous and pale. "Good morning, Sergeant," she said in her usual measured tone. "Why is the north gate sealed?" He swallowed. "Orders from command, Your Majesty." "Whose command?" she pressed. "Royal Security Council, ma'am. As of midnight." Camilla's expression didn't break, but her fingers tightened around the handle of her bag. Midnight. That meant the order came directly from the Palace Intelligence Bureau, and that could only happen with approval from the sovereign or the heir apparent. "Understood," she replied softly, then walked away. But her silence said everything. Meanwhile, inside another wing of the palace, one far brighter and warmer, Princess Catherine sat beside her desk reviewing a set of documents of her own. Her expression was calm but contemplative. The folder bore the same insignia Camilla had seen earlier, the seal of the Royal Security Council. It wasn't her doing, and yet her name was printed all over the order. The report stated that due to increased international attention and heightened public affection, the Princess of Wales would now be receiving the highest level of royal protection, previously reserved only for the monarch and queen consort. She closed the folder, exhaled quietly, and looked at the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II hanging opposite her. "Duty over comfort," the late queen had once told her, "even when it feels unfair." Outside her window, the royal guards were already repositioning, half of them marching from Camilla's courtyard to hers.
By noon, the palace press office was in crisis mode. Phones rang endlessly. Every reporter in London wanted to know the same thing. Had Camilla's authority been reduced? No one dared confirm, but silence itself was confirmation enough. To outsiders, it looked like a subtle shift in royal logistics. To those within the walls, it felt like an earthquake. Camilla's staff noticed the small changes first. Security doors that didn't open, access codes that no longer worked, files that required new clearance. Even her motorcade route had been rerouted for operational efficiency. But efficiency wasn't the reason. Behind closed doors, advisors whispered that a new image of monarchy was being built. One centered on empathy, youth, and global respect. Catherine, with her quiet dignity and modern grace, represented a fresh chapter the world seemed eager to embrace. Still, there were those who felt the move was too abrupt, too political, too personal. That evening, Camilla requested a private audience with King Charles. He met her in his study, weary-eyed, surrounded by unopened letters and red dispatch boxes. "Charles," she began, voice steady but edged with cold disbelief, "why was I not informed of this decision before the order was executed?" The king sighed. "Camilla, please understand. It's a precautionary measure, with global events unfolding, and Catherine's upcoming summit visit." "Don't insult me with diplomacy," she interrupted. "You reassigned my security detail. You restricted my access to my own residence. That is not precaution. That is exile dress and protocol." He lowered his gaze. "It was advised by the Privy Council and by the Prime Minister's office." Her eyes narrowed. "So now the government dictates royal safety?" Charles hesitated. "Not dictates. Recommends. Recommends to strip the Queen Consort of authority." The silence between them said what neither wanted to admit. The monarchy was changing, and not everyone was meant to stay in power. Outside, the royal courtyard glowed under the lamplight. The guards changed shift, their movements crisp and deliberate. The same guards who once followed Camilla now lined up under Catherine's balcony. Among them was Sergeant Whitmore, a man who had served both royals. He watched quietly as his new post was assigned. "Orders are orders," his captain reminded him. But something about it felt wrong, like crossing a silent boundary between tradition and betrayal. When Catherine passed by later that night, she paused briefly to thank them, something Camilla rarely did, though not out of arrogance, but out of habit. The sergeant noticed. He wondered silently, was this the reason the palace had changed its heart? By the next morning, the tabloids exploded. Camilla's guards reassigned Princess Catherine. Palace in disarray screamed across every headline. Social media buzzed with theories. Some said it was Charles's idea. Others believed it was a quiet power play from the Prime Minister, aiming to modernize the monarchy's image ahead of a global tour. But within the palace, something more emotional was unfolding, a deep, invisible divide between two women who both carried the crown's weight in different ways. Camilla, a symbol of endurance and scandal, survived. Catherine, a symbol of grace, motherhood, and rebirth. The balance had shifted, and for the first time, the guards, the silent witnesses of royal truth, felt like they were guarding more than people. They were guarding the future. When dawn broke over London, the palace facade looked unchanged. But inside, it was a different world entirely. The rhythm of footsteps, the coded radio chatter of royal guards, even the direction of the morning security patrol, all had shifted subtly toward one figure, Princess Catherine. And yet, she hadn't asked for any of it. That morning, Catherine sat in her private sitting room at Kensington Palace, her tea untouched, watching her children's laughter echo faintly down the hall. George was rehearsing for a school presentation. Charlotte was helping him memorize his lines, and little Louis, well, Louis was just being Louis, trying to turn the royal dog into a knight with a toy sword. But behind Catherine's gentle smile, her thoughts were miles away, fixed on a heavy envelope marked Royal Security Transition Brief. She didn't want this. Not the power, not the sudden attention, and certainly not the silent judgment echoing through Buckingham's old walls. But deep down, she knew this wasn't just about security. It was about legacy. Later that day, a private convoy arrived, unmarked, discreet. A motorcade of 4 black Range Rovers pulled up quietly at the back entrance. From one of them stepped President Barack Obama, now out of office but forever a statesman, on a private visit to London. This meeting hadn't been publicized. In fact, even most royal staff didn't know it was happening. The agenda was simple: a private discussion on mental health initiatives and international education partnerships, both causes close to Catherine's heart. But what unfolded inside that room went far beyond formal policy. When Obama entered the drawing room, Catherine rose to greet him. The moment was warm, human, a shared understanding between two figures shaped by public pressure yet grounded in humility. "It's been far too long," he smiled, shaking her hand. "You look well, Catherine." She laughed softly. "Thank you, Mr. President. You always bring the sunshine from across the Atlantic." But his smile faded slightly as he glanced around the heavily guarded corridor. "Quite the security presence," he noted. Catherine hesitated. "Yes, things have changed a bit." Obama studied her carefully. "You didn't request it, did you?" "No," she said simply. "But I've learned that in the palace, sometimes choices are made for you, long before you realize they've been decided." He nodded knowingly. "You remind me of someone I used to know. Someone who understood that quiet strength doesn't need to be loud to move a nation." There was a pause. The cameras outside clicked faintly as the press caught a single image. Obama and Catherine sharing a calm, smiling handshake beneath a soft beam of window light. By nightfall, that photo would circle the world. "Grace under fire." One American headline would read, "Catherine's quiet diplomacy outshines old palace politics," said another. The message was clear. Without saying a word, Catherine had stepped into the kind of symbolic leadership that no title could command and no power could buy. Back at Buckingham, Queen Camilla's frustration was boiling quietly beneath royal composure. She had spent decades navigating scandal, public criticism, and duty's endless demand, only to see her influence reduced by whispers and optics. "Grace under fire," she muttered at the headline, her tone a mix of disbelief and resignation. But she wasn't angry at Catherine, not really. She understood the younger woman's sincerity. What hurt was a shift, the unspoken understanding that the crown's emotional loyalty had moved elsewhere. Still, Camilla wasn't one to yield easily. She began making calls discreetly through long-trusted aides, seeking clarification from the Royal Security Council. Temporary reassignment. They called it standard precaution, but she could tell. The tone was final, and she knew one thing about the monarchy better than anyone. Once the tide turned, it never turned back. Meanwhile, among the royal guards, something unspoken was stirring. The men who once stood at Camilla's door now stood at Catherine's, and they felt the difference immediately. The tone of the household, the energy, the quiet respect. When Catherine passed through the corridor, she made a habit of greeting each by name. Small gestures, but to the men who stood hours on duty, it meant something. One night, as she returned from a charity event, she noticed a guard's glove torn at the seam. Without thinking twice, she said softly, "Please have that replaced. We can't have our guards cold, can we?" It wasn't just kindness, it was awareness, and it was noticed. Captain Whitmore, the same officer who'd once guarded Camilla, later wrote in his private log, "She doesn't command us. She respects us. That's why the men follow her, not by order, but by choice." A week later, Catherine was invited to speak at a diplomatic dinner in Windsor, her first major appearance since the reassignment. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned in, and every word she spoke was measured with royal precision. She began with a quiet smile. "In the world we live in, leadership isn't about holding the loudest voice. It's about holding the most faith. Faith in others, faith in decency, faith in what can still unite us when everything else divides." The room erupted in applause. But the moment that defined the night came when she paused, her eyes glancing toward the guard stationed along the walls. "To those who stand behind us, not for power but for protection, you remind us that loyalty isn't a duty. It's a choice of the heart." Even the most stoic guard shifted slightly, their pride evident in their stillness. That one sentence, broadcast across the world, changed everything. By the time the dinner ended, the palace knew what it meant. Catherine had not just accepted her new role, she had embodied it. Back at Buckingham, Charles watched the broadcast in silence. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes glistened faintly. He knew this moment marked the passing of something, not authority, but affection. The public's heart had chosen its queen long before the crown could. Camilla watched too. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply turned off the screen, straightened her shoulders, and whispered, "Then may she carry it well." The royal guard had always been a symbol of loyalty, silent, disciplined, and untouched by palace politics. But not this time. For the first time in generations, the men and women in scarlet coats found themselves torn between two queens. On one side stood Queen Camilla, the woman they'd sworn to protect since the early days of King Charles's reign. On the other, Princess Catherine, young, beloved, and now the figure around whom the Buckingham Palace seemed to rally. It wasn't rebellion. It was confusion. When the reassignment orders came, the guards didn't question them aloud. They never did. But behind closed doors, in the quiet of their barracks, over cups of tea and muffled conversation, doubt began to take shape. Sergeant Whitmore sat at a wooden table beneath the flickering light of the guardroom. Around him, a few soldiers leaned in, their uniforms still sharp, their voices low. "So that's it then," one of them murmured. "We're Catherine's men now." Whitmore hesitated. "We're the king's men. Always." "But the orders didn't come from the king," another added quietly. "They came from the council. Everyone knows what that means." Whitmore looked down at the polished surface of his cup. "It means we follow duty, even when duty doesn't make sense." A heavy silence followed, because deep down, none of them wanted to admit the truth. Their hearts had already chosen sides. Outside, the palace grounds shimmered under the glow of early evening. Camilla walked alone through the rose garden, one of the few places she could still enter without clearance. She stopped near a marble fountain, where water trickled softly over the stone angels. Her old security aide, Captain Reeves, approached cautiously. He had been by her side for nearly 10 years. But now, he wore a different insignia, reassigned like the others. "Your Majesty," he began, "I just wanted to—" Camilla turned, cutting him off gently. "You don't have to explain, Captain. I know how the palace works." Reeves frowned. "Still, it feels wrong. You trusted us. We should have been told." Camilla gave a tired smile. "The guards don't choose their queen. They're chosen by whoever holds the heart of the kingdom." He hesitated, unsure if it was bitterness or wisdom in her voice. "Maybe both." "Do they treat you well?" she asked softly. "Yes, ma'am. The princess is kind, very respectful." Camilla nodded slowly. "Then protect her well. If the palace wants a new queen, let her at least be safe." Reeves's throat tightened. He bowed deeply. "Ma'am, you'll always have my loyalty." "Loyalty," she whispered, almost to herself. "A word too big for this place sometimes." Meanwhile, Catherine was beginning to feel the invisible tension that followed every move she made. The guards were professional, courteous, but there was something heavier in their presence now. They were protective, yes, but also cautious, almost torn. One morning, as she entered the courtyard, she noticed Sergeant Whitmore at his post, rigid as stone. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes carried that same quiet strain she'd seen in others. She stopped before him. "Sergeant Whitmore, how long have you been in service?" 17 years, Your Royal Highness." "And you served the Queen Consort before this?" "Yes, ma'am." Catherine nodded. There was no accusation, only understanding. It must feel strange, being asked to change posts so suddenly. He hesitated, unsure if he should respond. "We serve where we're told, ma'am." Though, he paused, choosing his words carefully. A guard's heart remembers who trusted him first. Catherine looked him in the eye. "And do you believe trust can be shared?" He blinked, caught off guard by the question. "I suppose it can." She smiled faintly. "Then I hope you'll trust me too. Not because you must, but because I'll earn it." Whitmore bowed slightly. "You already are, ma'am." It was the first time any of the guards had spoken to her beyond protocol. That night, a quiet storm brewed above London. Rain tapped against the palace windows like unspoken words. Inside the guardroom, Whitmore opened his old duty logbook. The last entry under Camilla's detail was dated 3 weeks prior. He hesitated before writing a new one. Change is not betrayal. It's duty's test. The queen we serve now earns loyalty not with command, but with grace. Yet, part of me still feels like I left someone behind. He closed the book and set it aside. Outside, lightning flashed briefly across the sky, illuminating the two palace wings, one dark, one lit, divided by only a courtyard, yet feeling worlds apart. The tension finally reached a quiet breaking point during the next state event, a formal reception attended by foreign dignitaries and global leaders. Catherine was scheduled to greet them first, followed later by Camilla. The guards stood aligned along the corridor, polished, motionless, immaculate, but among them, eyes shifted nervously. The unspoken question lingered. Who truly commanded their loyalty now? When Catherine entered, the energy changed. She walked with that calm assurance that seemed to soften every room she entered. Even the air felt lighter. Then Camilla appeared moments later from the opposite end of the hall. The guard stiffened. Two processions, two symbols of royalty, both passing through the same corridor. And for the first time, both women came face to face. There was a brief pause, heavy, powerful, quiet. Cameras were not allowed inside, so the moment remained unseen by the world. Camilla broke the silence first. You were the crown of affection now, my dear. Wear it carefully. Catherine bowed respectfully. And you were the crown of endurance. I hope I honor what you built. Neither smiled, but both nodded. A fragile piece and a kingdom learning to breathe again. As they passed, the guards instinctively raised their swords in salute. But not to one or the other. To both. Because in that moment, loyalty wasn't divided. It was shared. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the lights dimmed, Sergeant Whitmore stood alone at his post under the rain. He watched the two palace wings glow faintly in the distance, one for the queen consort, one for princess. He whispered quietly to himself, maybe loyalty isn't about who wears a crown, but who carries the heart. And with that, he stood a little taller. Morning sunlight spilled across Buckingham Palace, golden and calm, as if the night storms had never happened. But beneath that calm shimmered a quiet awareness, the sense that something irreversible had taken place. The palace had changed. Gone were the overlapping commands and silent rivalries. In their place was a fragile balance, delicate, uncertain, but new. The world was watching, and it was about to see a monarchy reborn from its own tension. 3 weeks after the reassignment, a public event unlike any other was announced. The Royal Unity Ceremony. It wasn't on the official calendar, nor was it part of tradition. The idea came from Catherine herself, an open show of gratitude toward the royal staff, the guards, and the people who carry the monarchy on their shoulders. At first, it sounded small, almost ceremonial. But when word spread that both Camilla and Catherine would attend, together, side by side, the entire nation tuned in. Every news network prepared for what they called the palace's most anticipated appearance since the coronation. On the morning of the event, London streets filled with flags and cheers. Royal guards lined the procession route in full regalia, their polished armor catching the light like mirrors of history. Catherine stepped out first, dressed in a soft ivory coat, her hair swept neatly, her face radiant yet humble. The crowd erupted in applause. And then, moments later, Camilla emerged, dignified, steady, wearing deep emerald green. For the first time in weeks, her smile reached your eyes. The two women walked toward each other at the palace entrance, under the archway where centuries of kings and queens had once stood. The crowd fell silent. For a heartbeat, time seemed to pause. Then, quietly, deliberately, Catherine extended her hand. Camilla took it. The flash of cameras exploded, but even that couldn't overpower the collective sigh that rippled through the crowd. It wasn't victory or defeat. It was grace. Inside, the ceremony unfolded with warmth that felt human rather than regal. The royal guards, those same soldiers who felt torn weeks before, now stood united at full attention. Sergeant Whitmore stood near the front, his posture proud, his expression unreadable. But when Catherine turned to thank them publicly, even he couldn't hide the flicker of emotion behind his eyes. She stepped up to the podium and began. For every guard who stands in the rain, for every aide who serves unseen, and for every soul who has ever carried duty above desire, today is for you. The monarchy is not built from marble or gold, but from the faith of those who believe in its purpose. She paused, glancing toward Camilla. and endures, because those who came before us bore the harder storms, so we might see clearer skies. The audience rose in applause. Even the guards, who never clapped while on duty, allowed themselves a single firm nod of respect. When it was Camilla's turn to speak, there was a long silence before she began. Her voice, though aged with experience, carried strength and truth. "Change is not loss," she said softly. "It's the proof that we still have something worth protecting." Her eyes flickered toward Catherine. Every queen learns that her greatest duty is not to be loved, but to leave something behind worth loving. It wasn't an apology. It was a passing of wisdom and, perhaps, of peace. The two women shared a brief glance. No words, just the silent understanding that they were now bound by more than duty, by history. As the event concluded, the crowd outside roared, but inside, something quieter unfolded. King Charles, seated beside them, leaned slightly forward, his voice too low for microphones to catch. "You've both done what even I couldn't," he murmured. "You've made them believe again." Catherine smiled politely. "They never stopped believing, sir. They just needed to be reminded." Camilla's lips curved faintly, and perhaps so did we. Charles exhaled, the weight of years softening in that moment. That evening, as dust settled over London, the royal guards returned to their posts. The palace lights glowed warm against the deep blue sky. Sergeant Whitmore, now reassigned as chief of royal security, stood on the balcony overlooking the courtyard. Below him, the changing of the guard began, silent, disciplined, seamless. He thought back to those uncertain nights, when loyalty felt fractured. Now, watching the unity below, he finally understood. "We never guarded people," he whispered to himself. "We guarded what they stood for." Behind him, Catherine stepped quietly onto the balcony. "A beautiful night," she said gently. "Yes, ma'am," Whitmore replied, "and a good one to begin anew." She smiled. "Then let's keep it that way." Later, in her private study, Catherine sat by the window with a cup of tea, the city lights twinkling in the distance. On her desk lay 2 envelopes, one from the Prime Minister, another handwritten in elegant cursive. From Camilla. Inside, the note was short. "Dear Catherine, history will write about crowns and titles, but the truth is simpler. You made the people feel safe again. That is what every queen should hope for. See." Catherine folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her journal. Then she looked up, her reflection merging with the faint outline of the palace beyond. The old order had shifted. The monarchy had not fallen, it had grown. No rivalry, no scandal. Just evolution, born from conflict, tempered by grace. Outside, the guards stood beneath the moonlight, silent as ever. But for the first time in a long time, they weren't just standing watch. They were standing witness to a monarchy that had remembered its heart. And somewhere deep inside Buckingham Palace, between the echoes of tradition and the whisper of tomorrow, a new story began. A kingdom reborn, not through power, but through peace.